Here we keep you entertained by our folktales and true life stories. Please subscribe to our channel as it means the world to us. Also, please like, share, and comment on this channel for more exclusive contents. Now sit back and relax as we take you through the most wonderful epistle. The night Elena Reynolds met Zachary Coleman was not scripted by fate but by strategy. It was at an exclusive investor networking event in Manhattan's West End, where Elena, then a senior operations consultant, had no intentions of mingling. Dressed in a modest navy dress that clashed with the glitz around her, she stood in the corner with a glass of mineral water, watching people with delusions of grandeur pitch half-baked ideas. Then came Zachary, tall, disheveled in an expensive suit he clearly wasn't used to wearing, stumbling through a pitch that made zero fiscal sense but had passion woven through every sentence. His idea? A curated luxury sourcing service for bespoke interior pieces. No structure. No execution roadmap. But something about his conviction intrigued her. She interrupted him mid-pitch, not to flatter, but to correct his numbers. He laughed, asked her to join the conversation, and 2 hours later, they were drawing a rough business model on a napkin. Elena's background couldn't have been more different from the polished smiles and boardroom-born trust funds around her. She was raised in a modest neighborhood in Jersey City by her mother, Regina, a retired nurse who had once juggled 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Her younger brother Lucas was now a sports journalist climbing his own ladder without shortcuts. Elena had always been the fixer, the planner, the one people came to when things fell apart. Her passion for luxury interior products wasn't rooted in elitism, it came from the hours spent flipping through estate magazines her mother used to collect, fantasizing about creating beauty in spaces people called home. She worked her way through college, built a reputation consulting for mid-tier firms, and had just walked out of a toxic consulting agency when she met Zachary. She wasn't looking for romance or reinvention, just a challenge that didn't end with someone else taking credit for her genius. Zachary, on the other hand, was bred for the spotlight but not for substance. The son of Gerald Coleman, a cold-blooded real estate mogul, Zachary had grown up in a penthouse where success was measured in mergers, not meaning. After flunking out of 2 Ivy League programs and bouncing between startups, he finally had an idea of his own, but no discipline to build it. When Elena offered to review his pitch deck over coffee, he was stunned. Not because she said yes, but because she asked smarter questions than any consultant he'd hired. Over the next 3 weeks, what began as casual mentorship became an unspoken partnership. She restructured his vision into an executable plan, introduced him to real suppliers, drafted financial projections, and helped him register the company under the name Cove Crescent. He told people it was his brainchild. Elena never corrected them, yet. The early days of Cove Crescent were far from glamorous. The company's first office was a dusty 2-room space above a closed-down furniture store in Brooklyn, with no heating and flickering lights that made every late night feel like a horror movie. Elena brought her personal laptop, an old coffee maker, and the kind of focus that could slice through stone. Zachary was charismatic at meetings, shaking hands with everyone from landlords to potential clients, but it was Elena who created supplier pipelines, built the CRM from scratch, and negotiated deals with artisans in Italy, France, and Morocco using sheer confidence and relentless follow-up. She worked 15-hour days, often sleeping beneath her desk with invoices stacked beside her head like pillows. When the electricity cut off one evening in winter, she continued budgeting under the flashlight of her phone, whispering business affirmations to herself like prayers in the dark. Zachary's childhood friend and former college roommate, Caleb Ritchie, came into the picture during their 3rd month in operation. A fast-talking, whiskey-sipping strategist with a head for branding, Caleb offered to help shape the company's public image in exchange for a small equity stake. Zachary was eager to accept, but Elena hesitated. She was wary of letting another smooth talker into the fragile structure she was still cementing. Eventually, she conceded after Caleb impressed her with a full brand kit and investor pitch mock-up in less than 24 hours. Meanwhile, Elena's childhood best friend, Tasha Delgado, a self-taught private chef hustling her way through Manhattan's cutthroat culinary scene, often dropped by with leftover gourmet meals and blunt advice. Tasha had known Elena long enough to see when she was overextending herself, and every time she brought food, she brought warnings. Don't let him become the face of your work. I know your type, quiet genius, loud regret. Things escalated quickly when a supplier in Lisbon nearly backed out of a bulk deal after Zachary failed to confirm payment deadlines. It took Elena an all-night Zoom call, a faked Portuguese accent, and the promise of expedited shipping to salvage the contract. Zachary brushed it off, joking that she was a magician, while Caleb praised his buddy for having such a resourceful woman. That was the first time Elena felt it, that slight but stinging disconnect between the recognition she deserved and the credit being redirected. Yet she kept going, because the momentum was real. The buzz around Cove and Crescent started to spread, thanks to Elena's campaigns targeting boutique hotel chains and premium condo developers. But with each small win, a subtle shift occurred. Zachary became more the frontman, while Elena faded into the silhouette behind the success. She noticed it. Tasha noticed it. But neither of them were ready to say it aloud, yet. The first major contract changed everything. A boutique hotel chain based in Miami, impressed by the elegance and exclusivity of Cove and Crescent's sourcing portfolio, signed a 6-month contract that catapulted them into 7 figures. Zachary was euphoric, standing before the team like a conquering hero, raising toasts and making bold promises about yachts and future IPOs. But Elena, though proud, sat quietly beside the window with a notepad and calculator, already planning how to reinvest the windfall. That night, Zachary surprised her with an impromptu trip to Central Park. As snowflakes danced in the dim yellow glow of the street lamps, he pulled out a vintage engagement ring, his late grandmother's. Elena was stunned, not just by the proposal but by the vulnerability in his eyes. He asked her to be not just his business partner, but his wife. Overwhelmed by the moment, the history, and the illusion of love and loyalty, she said yes. News of the engagement spread like wildfire, but not everyone received it with celebration. Gerald Coleman, Zachary's father, responded with silence before finally inviting Elena to dinner, alone. Over dry steak and colder stares, he made his opinion clear. Elena was resourceful but lacked legacy, polish, and pedigree. My son needs a wife that elevates him socially, not one that drags him into obscurity with common ambition, Gerald said without flinching. Elena swallowed her pride, smiled, and replied, "Your son's already in the spotlight, sir. I'm just the one holding it steady." Back home, Zachary shrugged off the insult, choosing not to confront his father. "He's old school," he said, pouring scotch. "We don't need his approval." But Elena's confidence cracked a little that night. Meanwhile, her younger brother Lucas arrived in town for a job interview with a top sports network. Fiercely protective of Elena, he instantly disliked Zachary's aloofness but said nothing, yet. Wedding plans began while the business expanded at an alarming pace. Elena found herself managing supplier disputes, inventory audits, budget revisions, while simultaneously planning a wedding that Zachary seemed only half interested in. Tasha offered to help, but Elena insisted on doing it herself. She couldn't shake the voice in her head. This wedding isn't about love anymore. It's about proving something. Zachary, meanwhile, began growing closer to Caleb, whose ideas were flashy but lacked structural stability. Elena proposed changes to streamline operations, but Zachary brushed them off, saying, "Let's just enjoy this moment." She forced a smile, but deep inside, something was shifting. She began to feel like the backbone of something she wasn't even sure she belonged to anymore. But still, she pressed on, because that's who Elena was. She built. She sacrificed. And she stayed silent, long before silence started costing her everything. The wedding was everything a headline would adore, lavish, scenic, and dripping with curated elegance. Held at a chateau-style estate in upstate New York, the ceremony unfolded beneath an arch of imported white orchids, with champagne towers and live classical quartets filling the atmosphere with opulence. Yet behind the shimmer of crystal and silk, Elena felt hollow. Every detail, from vendor bookings to guest list adjustments, had been handled by her. Zachary barely glanced at the planning spreadsheets, dismissing logistics as your kind of thing. He was too busy charming his father's elite business contacts and basking in the admiration of being seen as a rising star in New York's entrepreneurial scene. Elena's mother, Regina, wept quietly during the vows, not from joy, but from unease. She had raised her daughter to be strong, not silent, and the woman standing in white beside Zachary seemed to be swallowing more than just emotion. The reception glittered with influencers and corporate sharks, all pretending to be close friends. Tasha, stunning in a bronze silk gown, stood beside Elena like a silent guard, watching every exchange with Zachary's business circle through narrowed eyes. Caleb delivered the best man's toast with his usual charisma, but his words were like honey glazed over broken glass. Behind every great man, he said with a smirk, is a woman making it all work. But in this case, I think the woman might be the engine while the man's just steering the wheel. The room chuckled, unaware of the storm it stirred in Elena. Zachary laughed louder than necessary, then leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't take that to heart. Caleb's always been dramatic." But Elena couldn't shake it. That line lingered in her chest like a shadow. Later that night, as they entered their hotel suite, Zachary passed out drunk while Elena sat on the window ledge, still in her gown, rereading Caleb's words in her mind. She didn't know why they stung more than the champagne burned. When they returned from their brief honeymoon in Napa, Elena noticed something was different in the office, almost imperceptibly. There were new vendor accounts she hadn't approved, a shift in the chain of command she hadn't authorized. When she raised it to Zachary, he waved it off. "We're scaling fast. I didn't want to stress you on our first week as newlyweds," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But that statement planted something bitter in her. He had started making decisions without her. At first, it was minor, marketing campaigns she wasn't looped into, invoice authorizations bearing only his signature. Then came his growing affinity for Caleb's ideas over hers. When she voiced her concerns, Zachary responded with laughter or deflection, often ending discussions with, "You don't trust me." It was a manipulative pivot she recognized too late. Elena didn't know it yet, but she was slowly being edged out of the very empire she built with her bare hands. Cove Crescent was no longer just a boutique startup, it was becoming a brand whispered about in elite development circles across Manhattan, Miami, and parts of Southern Europe. Its reputation for sourcing rare, top-tier luxury interior materials, from handcrafted Mediterranean limestone to bespoke Scandinavian woodwork, was spreading like wildfire. Elena's strategies were the bedrock. She refined supplier contracts to near-perfect logistics, created a pitch deck that caught investor attention in record time, and spearheaded a PR campaign that placed Cove Crescent on the front page of New York Interior's Quarterly. That campaign, where legacy meets luxury, was her idea, her execution. Zachary took the interviews, posed for the magazine covers, and held wine with investors while casually saying things like, "Our team nailed it." Behind the curtain, Elena kept managing everything. It was her data, her insight, her math. But when Justin Ainsley, a discreet UAE-based investor, and Meredith Grant, a dominating retail tycoon, joined the firm as stakeholders, only Zachary's name was credited in the press release. That same week, Zachary introduced the newest hire, Simone Vargas. She was stunning, poised, and overly polished in a way that didn't scream professional, it whispered curated. Former executive coordinator at a now-defunct interior show firm, Simone claimed she was only looking for a new challenge. Elena, though cordial, felt an immediate chill toward her. Simone didn't ask questions, she offered solutions for problems she hadn't been told about. She shadowed Zachary during investor calls, delivered meeting summaries before Elena even saw the agenda, and began streamlining areas of the company that weren't under her purview. "She's efficient," Zachary said, brushing off Elena's raised brow. "You need to focus on the creative side. Let her handle the admin noise." Elena didn't say anything at first, but she watched. Tasha noticed too during a staff dinner when Simone made a sarcastic remark about wives who want to be COOs. Zachary laughed. Elena did not. Meredith Grant, sharp and always 5 moves ahead, invited Elena for lunch alone the next day. Over a glass of chilled Chardonnay, Meredith cut through the pleasantries and said, "You're the brain of this machine. But if you keep letting him walk in front, they'll forget who laid the bricks." Elena didn't know whether to feel seen or ashamed. She hadn't realized just how far the perception had shifted. Inside the office, more employees started reporting directly to Simone. Calendar invites would mysteriously skip Elena. Supplier meetings were rescheduled without her knowledge. Caleb was hardly around anymore, buried in expansion branding work. And Zachary had started leaving earlier and coming in later, always with new ideas, but no discussions. The company was expanding, rapidly. But the woman who built its foundation had begun to feel like a shadow at her own table. Something was wrong, and deep inside Elena's gut, she felt it tightening. Simone's presence began to feel less like support and more like surveillance. She wasn't just organizing Zachary's schedule, she was controlling access. Emails that used to come directly to Elena were now filtered through Simone's inbox. Decisions were being made without any consultation, contracts signed before Elena even reviewed them. When she tried to bring this up in their weekly operations meeting, Zachary chuckled and said, "You're overthinking again. That's why I let Simone handle the bottlenecks." The room went silent. Elena looked around. None of the junior staff met her gaze. It was as if a new chain of command had quietly formed, one she hadn't approved. Meanwhile, she noticed discrepancies in the company's financials. Vendor payouts were irregular, certain expenditures were labeled under miscellaneous services, and the internal system passwords had been changed. When she confronted IT, she was told the request came from above. The message was clear: her access was no longer prioritized. Caleb, once the loud, wine-swigging marketing guru, had turned subdued around Elena. Their hallway conversations became one-word nods, and his formerly frequent office visits dwindled to calendar-only meetings. She cornered him one evening as he was about to leave and asked if something was going on. He gave her a conflicted look and said, "You should ask Zach." Then he left. The air felt poisoned with secrets, and even Tasha, usually the one with words of steel, confessed during brunch that something about Zachary and Simone made her stomach turn. "You know when a woman doesn't blink enough?" "That's Simone," she said. Lucas, who had been observing the distance growing between Elena and her husband, became concerned. One evening, while covering a charity gala for his publication, he spotted Zachary and Simone arriving together, separately from the company car. The intimacy in their body language wasn't professional. When he snapped a quick photo discreetly, he hesitated to show Elena. Not because it wasn't damning, but because he wasn't sure she'd believe it yet. That weekend, Lucas visited Elena with the photo saved on his phone. They sat in her living room, sipping tea in a silence too heavy for siblings who once shared everything. When he finally showed her the image, Elena didn't react with the fury Lucas expected. Instead, she studied it. Zoomed in. Analyzed it. Then handed it back. "Not yet," she whispered. "I need more than a photo. I need patterns." She wasn't ready to accuse Zachary without undeniable proof, not because she doubted the truth, but because she knew Zachary would twist it against her. That night, she opened her laptop and began combing through the company's VPN logs, checking timestamps, meeting minutes, travel receipts. Everything pointed to one conclusion: a silent coup was in progress. And at the center of it was a woman who blinked too little and smiled too much. Elena didn't panic, but a part of her began to prepare for war. The annual Cove Crescent executive dinner was supposed to be a celebration of growth, innovation, and unity, but Elena walked into the rooftop venue feeling like a guest at someone else's empire. The invitations had gone out without her approval, the speech she was meant to give had been removed from the agenda, and Simone, flawless in a crimson dress, was seated directly beside Zachary at the head table. Elena's seat was 2 chairs down. The small details screamed intentionality. She watched as Simone whispered into Zachary's ear, her hand brushing his sleeve with a familiarity that made Elena's stomach coil. When Elena approached them, offering a calm smile, Simone responded with a sharp compliment wrapped in sarcasm, "So glad you could make it. We weren't sure you'd keep up with all these changes." Zachary laughed like it was harmless. Elena didn't. That night, she stood by the railing, watching the city glow beneath her, wondering when exactly she had been voted off the island she helped build. The next morning, Elena attempted to assert her presence. She walked into the finance wing to address unpaid invoices from 3 overseas vendors, only to find her internal access restricted. The system she had personally customized now required clearance from Simone. HR claimed it was just a restructuring adjustment. Procurement refused to meet without scheduling through Simone's assistant. Even Caleb avoided eye contact in the hallway. Elena approached Zachary directly in his office. "What's going on?" she asked plainly. He barely looked up. "You've been under a lot of pressure lately, Lena. Maybe it's time you took a step back. Let Simone manage the noise so you can breathe." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a quiet exile disguised as concern. When she insisted she wasn't overwhelmed, Zachary sighed dramatically and muttered, "This is what I mean. You get defensive. This is why I didn't want to bring this up sooner." The gaslighting was precise, practiced, and chilling. And just like that, she walked out of the office that bore her design, feeling like an intruder. Later that evening, Tasha showed up at Elena's door with sushi, wine, and a solution. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, she said. But I hired someone. A private investigator. Elena looked at her in disbelief. Tash, that's illegal. No, Tasha replied. It's insurance. The kind you'll need when everything blows up. She handed Elena a folder containing the name and credentials of a licensed PI named Charlotte Mendez, who had successfully exposed high-level corporate theft before. Elena hesitated, but deep down, she knew the time for trusting words and appearances had passed. This wasn't just a workplace coup, it was a betrayal that had been months in the making. She opened her laptop and typed one sentence into an encrypted email. Charlotte, I need to know everything about Simone Vargas and her connection to my husband. As she hit send, Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply closed her laptop and whispered to herself, let's begin. Charlotte Mendez worked fast. Within 5 days, Elena received a locked USB drive containing surveillance footage, phone logs, and financial summaries. It was worse than she imagined. Simone had been siphoning company funds into an offshore shell account registered under a false alias linked to a property in Miami, a property Zachary had signed off on personally. Charlotte had also acquired discrete photos of Zachary and Simone checking into a private resort under aliases, along with timestamps that matched the missing hours on Zachary's calendar. Elena watched the footage with a cold, steady expression, not blinking, not crying, just absorbing. She didn't forward the files. Not yet. She walked into the office the next day, calm as ice, and requested a private meeting with Zachary. He accepted, assuming it was another one of her emotional spirals. But when she placed the USB on the table and asked, would you like to explain this, or should I, his face didn't twist in shame. It hardened in calculation. Zachary leaned back in his chair and gave a smile so calm it terrified her. You had me followed, he said, as though he were the victim. Elena didn't answer. You realize how paranoid that makes you sound, right? He continued. I should have known we'd reach this point. He tapped the table, then added, maybe it's time you stepped away. Permanently. Elena froze. Excuse me? He leaned forward. Effective immediately, you're on a leave of absence. You need rest. You're clearly unwell. I already filed it with HR this morning. Her voice shook with rage. You don't have that authority without board consultation. He pulled out a signed document. A forged signature. Hers. Elena's mouth went dry. Simone will step in as interim COO, Zachary said, standing up. It's better for the company. Better for your image. Take a break, Elena. You've been slipping. Her hands trembled, not out of weakness, but fury. But she said nothing. She simply picked up the USB, turned, and walked out of his office as if the floor beneath her wasn't disappearing. That evening, as if to twist the knife deeper, Elena received a company-wide memo announcing Simone Vargas as the new interim chief operating officer. The language was diplomatic but humiliating, thanking Elena for her dedication and framing her departure as a strategic sabbatical. She stared at the message on her screen for minutes without breathing. Her phone buzzed with messages from stunned employees and a voicemail from Lucas screaming to burn the place to the ground. Tasha called 3 times. Elena didn't answer any of them. Instead, she opened a fresh document, titled it The Separation Plan, and began listing everything she knew, every deal she negotiated, every investor she brought in, every trademark that bore her signature. The betrayal had passed the point of tears. It had crystallized into something else, clarity. She wouldn't yell. She wouldn't beg. She would plan. Because if Zachary Coleman thought this was over, he had just handed the wrong woman a reason to rise, and this time, she'd do it alone. Elena arrived at the Cove Crescent headquarters just before 8 a.m., dressed in slate-gray slacks, her hair pulled into a sleek bun. There was a storm in her eyes, but calm in her movements. She had made up her mind, she wouldn't go down without a fight. She pushed through the glass revolving doors like she had 1,000 times before. But this time, the security system beeped red. Ms. Reynolds, I'm sorry, said Marcus, the front desk guard who had once brought her coffee after late nights. Your badge has been deactivated. Mr. Coleman's orders. Elena blinked, thinking he must be mistaken. Deactivate, what? She reached into her bag and pulled out a backup ID. The same message flashed red. Behind Marcus, 2 more guards approached. We've been instructed not to let you in. There was no confrontation, no crowd, no violence, just silence. A silent exile from the very building she built brick by brick. At first, she laughed. It wasn't out of humor, it was disbelief. She took a step back and looked up at the towering building, remembering how she helped choose the marble for the lobby floor, how she had written the vendor acquisition strategy that paid for it. Now, she wasn't even allowed to walk on it. A few employees watched from the glass, their faces pale, mouths agape. She met eyes with one of the interns she mentored, Sierra, the girl who used to ask for career advice every lunch break. Sierra looked away. Just like that, Elena Reynolds became a ghost. Not fired. Not warned. Just deleted. As she walked back toward her car, she opened her phone to check her email. Her Cove Crescent domain had been disabled. Her cloud files wiped. Her shared folders unlinked. All of it, gone. It was like she had never existed. And for the first time in her life, Elena realized silence was not the absence of noise, it was the sound of being erased. Back home, Elena sat in her apartment, unmoving, staring at her reflection. Not the physical one, but the identity that had shattered like glass. Her phone rang, but she ignored it. The final straw wasn't a betrayal, it was the ease with which it had been executed. No protest. No warning. Just a cold memo and locked doors. Simone now ran everything. Zachary had not only exiled her, he had rewritten the narrative. She wasn't the co-founder anymore. She wasn't even a footnote. But somewhere between the tears she didn't allow and the breath she held in her lungs too long, a spark ignited. She walked to her bedroom closet, pulled down a leather-bound notebook, her backup plan, her what-if. She had built an empire once. She would build another. But this time, no one would get to steal her light. She opened to page 1, took a deep breath, and began again, not as a wife, not as an executive, but as Elena Reynolds, the woman they tried to erase. Elena didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. The blinds remained shut, her phone on silent, the world reduced to muffled echoes outside her window. Her once pristine living room was now scattered with pieces of her shattered routine, legal notepads half filled with ideas, untouched coffee mugs growing cold, and torn-up printouts of emails that no longer had her name on them. She replayed every memory, every late night spent crunching numbers, every vendor call she took while battling the flu, every time she covered for Zachary when he stumbled in late to meetings with a hangover. And for what? To be erased without a word. Her mind looped through it all, his indifference, Simone's smirk, the silence of those who once praised her. She wasn't just angry, she was heartbroken. Her betrayal wasn't just professional, it was spiritual. She had poured her soul into something that had spat her out like trash, and now, the silence inside her walls screamed louder than any boardroom betrayal. Tasha was the first to break through. She banged on the door for over 10 minutes before Elena opened it, wordless, with red eyes and tangled hair. Tasha didn't speak either, she just walked in, cleaned up the mess, warmed a bowl of stew, and sat beside her. Later, Lucas showed up with his laptop and evidence, screenshots of articles, whispers in industry blogs, side-by-side comparisons of Cove and Crescent before and after Elena's absence. Even investors were starting to raise eyebrows. They know something's wrong, he said. They're watching. Meredith Grant left a voicemail that Elena finally listened to on day 5. If you're ready, you have my backing. I never bet on men who steal their woman's genius. That line cracked something open. The world wasn't blind, it had just gone quiet. But the silence had an expiration date. Elena opened her drawer and retrieved the black leather notebook she had scribbled in years ago, a personal journal of ideas she had never dared to share, even with Zachary. The notebook was thick with visions, Maison Oriole, a boutique consulting firm focused on elite material sourcing, but with tighter logistics, private branding, and a unique client onboarding model. She had written it as a backup during Cove and Crescent's early days, never intending to need it. Now, it felt prophetic. She ran her fingers over the name, sketched in gold ink like a whisper of her future self. That night, she cleared her desk, booted up her laptop, and registered the domain. The next morning, she filed the LLC. She didn't post about it. She didn't scream her comeback. She moved in silence, because silence had taught her something powerful. It didn't always mean defeat. Sometimes, it meant transformation. As she pressed submit on her registration, she knew it. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her name, her voice, her legacy. The storm hadn't ended. It had just begun, on her terms. The office space was modest, a two-room loft above a flower shop in Brooklyn that smelled of fresh eucalyptus and jasmine every morning. It had peeling white paint and creaky floors, but to Elena, it was sacred ground. This wasn't a headquarters, it was a sanctuary, a new beginning. She furnished it herself, carefully and methodically, with the same obsessive attention to detail she once gave to her former company. On her first day inside, there was no ribbon cutting or fanfare. Just a whiteboard, a laptop, and a fire in her chest that refused to die. She named it Maison Aureole, French for House of Halo, symbolizing the brilliance she was never again going to dim for anyone. She worked around the clock, refining the service structure, rebuilding old connections, writing proposals from scratch. Each signature she penned reminded her that she hadn't lost, she'd been set free. And this time, no one was going to outshine her in her own light. Lucas, ever the storm in a journalist's skin, had grown furious watching the media glorify Zachary and Simone while Elena suffered in silence. He decided to write a piece, not as her brother, but as an investigative reporter. The headline read, "The Woman They Erased, How a CEO's Wife Was Locked Out of Her Own Empire." He published it anonymously under a pseudonym on a rising media platform. It went viral overnight. Screenshots flooded Twitter and Instagram, and within hours, business analysts began asking questions. Anonymous testimonials from former interns and even a mid-level finance manager confirmed the internal restructuring had been abrupt and suspicious. Though Elena didn't comment or repost the article, her inbox began to buzz. Old contacts, former vendors, even curious investors who'd once ignored her now wanted to know more about Maison Aureole. She hadn't sought vengeance, but vindication had arrived anyway, and she welcomed it with calculated quiet. Meredith Grant scheduled a private meeting in her Park Avenue suite. Elena arrived, poised in navy slacks and a champagne blouse, unbranded but powerful. Meredith poured her a glass of still water and said only one sentence, "Name your terms." With that, Elena secured her first official backer. Meredith didn't just invest, she connected Elena with her first 3 clients, an upscale resort chain in Greece, a luxury co-working design firm in Toronto, and a high-end spa group in Seattle. Elena signed all 3 within 10 days. Each deal was secured not by flashy presentations or PR hype, but through direct consultation, precise forecasting, and her signature brilliance in procurement negotiation. Maison Aureole wasn't just rising, it was catching fire. Meanwhile, Cove and Crescent remained unaware of the brewing shift. Zachary and Simone were too busy being photographed at galas to notice that the woman they buried was not beneath the earth. She was beneath them, rebuilding her ladder up. While Elena's quiet rise continued in the background, the once glamorous machine of Cove and Crescent began to jam from the inside. Vendors who once raved about the company's reliability started pulling back due to delayed payments, erratic delivery timelines, and mismatched materials. Simone, despite her polished presence, lacked Elena's operational discipline and negotiation instinct. She dismissed longtime vendors who raised concerns and replaced them with flashier but unvetted alternatives. Internally, employees whispered about growing chaos. Key team leads resigned within weeks. Investor Justin Ainsley, discreet but observant, flew in for an unannounced site visit and left within 30 minutes. Still, Zachary remained oblivious, too invested in the image. He was busy planning the company's 3rd anniversary gala and filming promotional content, while the firm's back end crumbled. Elena, watching from afar, said nothing. She didn't need to retaliate. Cove and Crescent was doing that to itself. The empire had removed its architect, and now it didn't know how to stay standing. Elena, meanwhile, was closing the biggest deal of her career. The European boutique hotel chain, Celeste Maison, signed an exclusive sourcing contract with Maison Aureole, allowing Elena's team to furnish all 5 of its new properties with signature imported materials and unique minimalist pieces. The deal would span 3 years and was worth over $11.2 million. Elena didn't announce the signing on social media. She simply updated a private folder, locked it, and moved on to the next client. Her strength was no longer in noise, it was in precision. Around that time, Tasha walked into her office and dropped a folder of catering menus on her desk. "This is me giving up a dream that's killing me for one that gives me life," she said. She had closed down her private kitchen and decided to lead Maison Oriol's hospitality and lifestyle sourcing department. Elena didn't cry. She simply pulled out a spare desk key, slid it across the table, and said, "Let's build something that feeds us both." The ripple of Tasha's joining didn't go unnoticed. Her culinary network included luxury event planners, private estate designers, and overseas hospitality executives, all now interested in working with Maison Oriol. In less than a month, Elena's modest loft office expanded into 2 more suites upstairs. She hired a new executive assistant, a research analyst, and a procurement coordinator, all women who had been previously overlooked or underpaid in male-led companies. Her firm became known in whispered circles as the firm with a conscience, efficient, elegant, and empowering. Meanwhile, back at Cove Crescent, Zachary was forced to cancel 2 deals due to supply chain collapse. Simone panicked during a boardroom call and accidentally deleted a master supplier contract during a screen share. The board was no longer smiling. Zachary's emails were going unanswered. And for the first time since Elena's lockout, fear crept into the halls of a company that once believed it couldn't fall. But storms never ask permission, they arrive, one quiet gust at a time. It started with a whisper on a luxury design podcast, "There's a woman reshaping how elite sourcing works." No press. No noise. Just results. The host didn't mention Elena's name, but the curiosity was ignited. Within weeks, 3 elite lifestyle publications picked up the trail, all pointing to a rising firm, Maison Oriol, that had secured contracts with some of the most exclusive resort chains and wellness brands in North America and Europe. Elena granted one interview, anonymously. The article titled "The Ghost Behind the Gold" became viral, highlighting her rise from betrayal to brilliance without naming her or the firm. Still, insiders knew. Investors knew. And most importantly, clients began asking one recurring question: is this the woman who built Cove Crescent? Elena stayed silent. She didn't want to prove anything. Her work spoke loud enough. One investor even pulled out of Cove Crescent after seeing Maison Oriol's projections, choosing quiet precision over fading reputation. Inside Cove Crescent, the tension was now undeniable. Simone, who once radiated control, had started unraveling under the pressure. Her calendar was overbooked with damage control meetings, and she could barely manage the internal conflicts piling up from neglected vendors, late payments, and canceled shipments. One afternoon, she stormed into Zachary's office waving a luxury interiors magazine that had mentioned Maison Oriol in glowing terms. "She's doing this on purpose," she snapped. Zachary, red-eyed and irritable, dismissed her concerns. "If she wanted to destroy us, she'd already have. Just focus." But Simone wasn't satisfied. She tried blocking Elena's access to an exclusive sourcing database, only to discover Elena had already built her own proprietary version, one that several small firms had started paying to use. The blow to her pride was crushing. Simone began working longer hours, making mistakes, and lashing out at junior staff. The image was cracking. And once image cracks, reputation follows. In a panic, Zachary called a board meeting to redefine their competitive strategy. He proposed expanding into fashion retail, a move so off-brand that half the board exchanged confused glances. Justin Ainsley declined the meeting altogether, citing schedule conflict. Meredith Grant, who had once invested with Poise, pulled her remaining shares silently 2 days later. Meanwhile, Caleb, who had distanced himself from both camps, began receiving messages from ex-employees of Cove Crescent asking if he knew what was really happening. In a moment of curiosity, he searched Maison Oriol's LLC filing and nearly dropped his phone when he saw Elena's full name on the incorporation. "She never left," he murmured to himself. That night, he typed a one-line message to Elena: "They're about to come for you." But Elena wasn't afraid. She'd built something with her own hands, no signatures forged, no titles stolen. This time, her name wasn't just remembered. It was revered. The lawsuit came like a slap across the face, but Elena didn't flinch. Zachary filed a claim in civil court stating he was entitled to 50% of Maison Oriole, asserting that the company was founded on resources, intellectual property, and strategy developed during their marriage and time at Cove Crescent. It was insulting and desperate, and the public filing made headlines. Former power couple headed to court over new empire. The headline irritated her, but it didn't distract her. This wasn't just about business, it was about identity. Elena had expected Zachary to retaliate. What she didn't expect was how sloppy he'd be. He underestimated her resilience, her paper trail, and most of all, her silence. What he saw as detachment had been preparation. She gathered her legal team, including a top corporate litigation lawyer named Rowena Keyes, and began preparing a defense not just to win, but to expose. Inside the courtroom, Zachary arrived in tailored navy, gripping his ego like a shield. Simone sat 2 rows behind him, in a black blazer and forced poise, her once smug smirk tightened with fear. Elena walked in dressed in ivory, not to symbolize innocence, but to stand out from the shadows they had tried to shove her into. As proceedings began, Zachary's lawyer argued that Elena's company had benefited from knowledge and infrastructure developed during her time at Cove Crescent. He spoke of marital assets, strategic overlap, and shared entrepreneurial history. Elena let them speak. And then, calmly, she handed the judge a folder containing time-stamped emails, dated designs, personal journals, and the original notebook scans of Maison Oriole's concept, drafted before Cove Crescent ever had a name. Her team also introduced a forensic tech expert who confirmed forged documents, including the HR file stating she had approved her leave of absence. The courtroom stirred. Even the judge leaned forward. But it was the final file that detonated like a bomb, screenshots of Zachary's digital signature, used illegally to demote Elena from internal systems, and bank transfers from company accounts into Simone's shell company in Miami. The same company Charlotte Mendez had discovered months earlier. Zachary's face blanched as the evidence was projected across the courtroom screen. Simone excused herself from the room and never came back. Caleb, seated quietly near the back, dropped his head into his hands. Even Zachary's own lawyer paused, whispering frantically into his ear. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just stared straight ahead as the judge banged the gavel for recess. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was methodical. And she had just served it, ice cold. The courtroom was filled with the quiet tension of a ticking bomb as everyone filed back in after recess. The media had gotten wind of the revelations from the previous day. Journalists lingered outside, flashing cameras, hungry for an official outcome. Inside, Judge Trenton read through the documents one last time before looking up. This court finds that Mr. Zachary Coleman has no legal entitlement to Maison Oriole or its assets. Furthermore, the court acknowledges evidence of malicious corporate interference and forgery on the part of the plaintiff. A collective gasp echoed as Zachary sank lower in his chair. The gavel dropped like a closing chapter. Elena didn't celebrate. She simply exhaled, as though the weight of every betrayal, every erased title, every sleepless night had just been lifted from her chest. Rowena squeezed her hand gently, while Lucas and Tasha exchanged tears of joy and vindication. The room wasn't just filled with victory, it radiated a shift in power. Within 48 hours, news outlets exploded with the headlines: Coleman loses court battle in bitter corporate feud, and former CEO exposed in stunning legal defeat. Meredith Grant publicly confirmed her prior suspicions in a press release, stating her departure from Cove Crescent had been a silent protest against incompetence and arrogance. Investors pulled out almost simultaneously, like dominoes falling in slow motion. One of the core suppliers terminated all future contracts, citing breach of ethical integrity. Simone's email bounced. No one had heard from her since she left the courtroom. Her apartment was vacated. Her bank accounts, according to whispers from insider sources, had been frozen. Zachary, now under financial scrutiny, returned to his office only to find the board waiting without welcome. They handed him a letter of removal. Effective immediately. His name would be stripped from the CEO title, his equity frozen pending investigation, and his access revoked. In the span of 1 week, the empire he stole collapsed under the weight of the woman he underestimated. Elena stood at the window of her new office, a sleek space overlooking the East River, watching the city hum below her. It was poetic, the way silence had turned into justice, how erasure became elevation. She didn't send a mass email or hold a press conference. Her only response was a quiet update to Maison Oriol's official website, where she added one sentence to the About Us page, built by hands that were once dismissed. It spread across social media like wildfire. Former employees of Cove and Crescent now submitted applications to her firm in droves, hoping to work for the woman who had not only survived sabotage, but rose with grace and vengeance laced in elegance. And while Zachary sat alone in his penthouse, staring at an empty inbox, Elena was building her future, client by client, brick by golden brick. The verdict had been spoken. But her story was still unfolding, on her terms, and this time, she wasn't sharing the pen. Zachary stood outside Elena's new office building for over 30 minutes, unsure of what to say, unsure if she'd even agree to see him. He wore a plain gray suit, not the kind meant for power plays, but for apologies. When Elena finally agreed to meet, privately, without her legal team, it wasn't out of curiosity, but closure. They sat across from each other in a minimalist conference room, the silence between them more deafening than any courtroom verdict. "I lost everything," he said, voice cracked. Elena didn't blink. "No," she replied calmly. "You lost what wasn't yours to begin with." He apologized, he begged, he even tried to reminisce about the early days, those late nights building slides, their first client win, the vision they once shared. But Elena looked at him like one might look at a stranger on the train. "You weren't just careless with me," she said. "You were careful about how you erased me. That's what I'll never forget." While Zachary was spiraling through his guilt, though some might call it ego and mourning, Elena was charting a new course. Maison Oriol had recently secured contracts to furnish high-end executive spaces for a financial institution in Madrid. It was the firm's first official expansion outside North America, and Elena managed it with signature silence and precision. Her executive assistant, Harlow, handled logistics. Tasha was promoted to creative director for hospitality environments. The firm now had 12 full-time staff, several part-time consultants, and a waiting list of prospective clients that stretched into the next fiscal year. Elena didn't celebrate loudly. She simply upgraded the office space, added a quiet reading lounge for staff, and sent handwritten thank you letters to her first 5 clients. Meanwhile, former Cove and Crescent employees who had once looked down on her were sending in resumes, referrals, and LinkedIn endorsements. Elena accepted none of them. She wasn't building a mirror of the past. She was building something entirely new. Tasha, now in a better place professionally and emotionally, found the courage to reopen an old wound, her father, Raul Delgado. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, not since he walked out after divorcing her mother and starting a new family in Phoenix. But now, by a twist of fate or divine alignment, Raul had become the director of interior acquisitions at a luxury art and design firm in Chicago, one of Maison Oriol's new collaborators. Elena gently encouraged the reconnection, but Tasha was hesitant. Still, she reached out. What started as an awkward email turned into a phone call, then coffee, then a cautious reconciliation. Raul admitted he had followed Tasha's growth in silence, proud but too ashamed to step forward. Tasha didn't cry. She simply told him, "You're here now." That's enough. That reunion didn't just mend a personal bond, it sparked a deeper partnership between Raul's firm and Maison Oriol, expanding the company's sourcing network across the Midwest. Forgiveness, like growth, was now part of Elena's empire too. Lucas Reynolds had always known how to tell a story, but this time, the story was personal. His book, The Blueprint She Wrote, hit the shelves without fanfare, yet the moment it was released, it began climbing charts like wildfire. Though names were changed for legal reasons, everyone in the industry knew who it was about. The narrative captured not just betrayal, but resilience, brilliance, and rebirth, the anatomy of a woman erased by the very empire she built. Elena hadn't read it before publication, Lucas insisted on that. But when she opened the first chapter and saw the dedication, "To the woman who taught me that silence can be power, and survival can be strategy," she wept. The book trended on social media, and interview requests poured in, not just for Lucas, but for Elena. She declined most. She wasn't interested in being a symbol. But she did accept one request, to mentor a group of young women entrepreneurs behind closed doors. No cameras. No credits. Just legacy. Everett Monroe had entered Elena's orbit months ago, an investor-turned-client who initially hired Maison Oriole to design his private retreat in Aspen. He was nothing like Zachary, grounded, calm, curious, and fiercely respectful. Their professional exchanges evolved slowly into evening conversations, and eventually into something warmer, more unspoken than declared. Everett never pushed for definitions. He simply showed up. He brought her peppermint tea when she worked late, sent her books he thought she'd enjoy, and never once asked about her past unless she offered it. Elena, for once, didn't feel the need to lead every interaction. With Everett, she could rest without crumbling. One Sunday, they walked quietly along the Hudson River, her hand brushing against his. "You don't need to be ready," he said, "you just need to be real." Elena didn't reply. But the next time he called, she answered before the second ring. It wasn't love at first sight, it was peace at first trust. Elsewhere, Caleb Ritchie, once Zachary's closest friend and branding ally, had finally severed his ties with Cove and Crescent. He had watched its descent too long and remained silent too often. But after reading Lucas's book and confirming what he had always suspected, Caleb made the cleanest cut of his life. He launched his own sports design and event branding firm, Elevation 9, focusing on high-performance environments for pro athletes and corporate retreats. On his firm's announcement day, he received a DM from Elena, "Took you long enough. Proud of you." He replied with a gif of a phoenix. Meanwhile, Zachary, now officially ousted and struggling to stay relevant, reached out to Caleb with an offer to reconnect and maybe work together again. Caleb didn't respond. He just archived the message. Loyalty, he'd learned, isn't about how long you've known someone, it's about what they do when you're not in the room. And when Elena wasn't in the room, Caleb had said nothing. That silence would always haunt him. Zachary showed up unannounced at Elena's apartment building just after dusk, the sky bruised with the kind of melancholy that matched his desperation. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, disheveled, eyes rimmed red, not from sorrow, but from collapse. When the receptionist called to ask if she would see him, Elena paused, then agreed. Not out of sympathy, but closure. He stood at her door with trembling hands, holding an old photo of them during the early Cove and Crescent days, smiling, naive, unaware of the storm to come. "I know I don't deserve your time," he began, voice hoarse, "but I need you to know, I never wanted to lose us." Elena listened without interrupting. He spoke of mistakes, regrets, and sleepless nights. "We built everything together," he said. "We were unstoppable." She tilted her head, then stepped aside, letting him in, not into her life, but into a moment that would end it all. They sat across from each other, Elena serene in her posture, Zachary unraveling by the minute. "You didn't lose us," she said softly, "you destroyed what you never truly valued." He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand. "Let me finish." She stood and retrieved a small rectangular mirror from the table drawer and placed it in front of him. "You didn't love me, Zach. You loved your reflection in my success. That's what you chased. That's what you mourn now." He stared into the mirror, unable to speak. "You saw me as your strategy, not your partner," she continued. "When I stopped letting you stand on my shoulders, you tried to erase me. But here's the thing about women like me, we don't vanish. We evolve." Zachary's eyes brimmed with tears, but Elena didn't move to comfort him. That part of her was gone. "You taught me something valuable," she added, walking him to the door. "Never build a kingdom with someone who envies your crown." Outside, the wind howled as Zachary stood frozen on the steps, unsure whether to scream, cry, or crawl back into the shadows where he now belonged. Elena shut the door without looking back. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She leaned against the door, inhaled deeply, and smiled, not out of cruelty, but freedom. She was finally done. No lingering hopes. No recycled love. That chapter had closed itself. Upstairs, Everett had left a note beside her wine glass, "I'll be back in an hour." "I left the light on." She folded the note and tucked it inside her drawer, the same one that once held contracts, court summons, and broken dreams. The difference now was, none of it controlled her. She poured herself a glass of wine, stood on her balcony, and looked out at the skyline. Somewhere, below, Zachary was spiraling. But up here, Elena was soaring, proof that healing wasn't just about moving on. It was about never looking back. The ribbon wasn't cut with cameras flashing or dignitaries applauding. There was no media blast, no social unveiling. Yet Maison Oriol's international branch in Valencia, Spain opened with the kind of quiet thunder only true legacy creates. Elena chose Spain because it represented her rebirth, sun-soaked, elegant, rooted in history but not stuck in it. The office was minimalist yet inviting, with olive-toned marble and soft gold accents sourced from artisans she had personally negotiated with months prior. Her first clients in Europe had waited nearly a year to work with her, and they said it was worth every second. Elena didn't open the branch as a conquest, it was a statement. That greatness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers across oceans. Back in New York, inquiries doubled, clients begged for consultations, and Elena, measured as ever, kept her calendar tight. She didn't need to be everywhere. She just needed to be remembered everywhere. And she was. Privately, Elena established something far more personal than any award or recognition, the Reynolds Monroe Scholarship, named quietly after her mother and funded entirely from her own earnings. It offered immigrant women with strong ideas in sourcing, logistics, and luxury interiors a chance to receive business mentorship and operational training. There was no gala. No donation drive. Just quiet letters, interviews, and a once-a-year selection process that she reviewed herself. It wasn't a foundation, it was her legacy, rebuilt through every girl who had once been told she didn't belong in boardrooms. Her mentorship sessions happened in person, unpublicized, in quiet co-working corners or tea lounges. Elena never offered them blueprints, she offered them belief. And one by one, they bloomed. Meanwhile, Everett became more than a presence, he became home. No proposal, no grand gestures, just two lives that moved side by side with trust and mutual respect. Elena finally understood what peace felt like, not the absence of noise, but the absence of performance. Back in Manhattan, Tasha's life had taken a vibrant turn. She got engaged to Jamal Bennett, a charming culinary investor she met during a cross-networking event Elena had convinced her to attend months earlier. Their love was spirited, imperfect, and grounded in mutual hustle. Tasha wore her engagement ring with pride and still walked into meetings at Maison Oriol like a storm in heels. Lucas, too, hit a milestone, named editor-in-chief of a prestigious international sports journal, fulfilling a lifelong dream he'd sacrificed for years. At his launch dinner, he toasted Elena in front of a packed room, calling her the reason truth has a spine. She didn't cry, but she held his hand a little longer than usual. Around her, the people she loved were thriving. Not because she saved them, but because she made space for all of them to rise. The empire she once built with someone else was dust. But the legacy she built now, it had roots, wings, and her name carved in stone. The lakeside estate wasn't lavish, it was intentional. Tucked quietly in the Adirondacks, surrounded by pine and peace, it was the place Elena chose not to hide, but to heal. The interior was sunlit and simple, filled with natural textures, glass walls, and hand-woven furnishings from artisans she had helped launch through Maison Oriol's community outreach program. On the main wall, above her fireplace, hung a single-framed photograph, not of her in a boardroom, not of the company's first office, but of the security guard standing in front of the Cove Crescent building, telling her she wasn't allowed in. She had kept it as a reminder. Not of humiliation, but of liberation. That moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The door that slammed had echoed across her life, only to open the right one. And now, everything around her, the stillness, the soft wind, the serenity, was hers, earned not from revenge, but reinvention. Everett returned from the lake with 2 steaming cups of tea and a quiet smile. He wasn't her rescuer, he was her reflection. Calm, grounded, endlessly supportive. They had discussed marriage, children, even the idea of eventually slowing down, but there was no rush. Elena had learned that timing was everything, and her timing no longer belonged to anyone else's expectations. They spent their mornings in the garden, their evenings by the fireplace, and their days building a life designed with care, not ego. In her private studio, Elena drafted blueprints, not just for sourcing strategies, but for a new mentorship model she'd roll out across Europe. It wasn't for credit. It was for impact. Her empire didn't need lights, logos, or applause. It needed meaning. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was proving anything. She was simply living. Fully. Authentically. Without apology. And that was the greatest reward of all. Somewhere in Manhattan, Zachary sat at a small cafe near what used to be the Cove and Crescent headquarters. The name had been removed, replaced with leasing signs and silence. His reflection in the window no longer resembled the man who once thought himself untouchable. He had sent Elena one last letter, no demands, no apologies. Just a sentence, "You were always the architect." She never replied. She didn't need to. Her silence was no longer a sign of surrender, but of evolution. Meanwhile, Elena stood barefoot on the deck of her lakeside home, wind brushing her face, tea in hand, sun pouring over the trees like blessing. She wasn't who she used to be. She was more. A woman who had been betrayed, erased, underestimated, and who had risen without needing to scream. This was her new beginning. And she welcomed it with the kind of grace that doesn't beg for attention. Because queens don't announce their reign. They simply rise and rule. The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment, and also share to your loved ones or anyone who might be interested. Turn on post notification after subscribing so you get informed on our next video. Thank you, and I'd see you next time. Bye for now.